Well, I'm so happy today that as we're unpacking this subject of hope, that I have a good friend of mine, Dr. Grant Mullen. He's been on the program before. He's a mental health physician. He's an author. He and his wife, Kathy, do marriage encounter weekends, and they do so much to help people every week. Every week. Grant, welcome to the program. And when I was talking about what you do every week, just jump in right there with some of the interesting things that you provide for people to find hope.
Yes, I actually have a website that's full of information on how to be transformed mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. And we
Wow.
send out a free 5-minute video every Wednesday to people on our mailing list just to try to help them in their journey of getting closer to Jesus and making their life more worthwhile.
You know, Grant, I think it's important that we establish, even though we've talked to our viewers before, why you're qualified to talk about this, because you're a doctor, right? Tell me a little bit of that funny story. You can do it in 20 seconds, just how God got you doing what you're doing now.
Well, actually, when I graduated, I became an anesthetist because I wanted to put people to sleep, just because to have the minimal amount of human contact and the maximal amount of contact with gadgets. Plus, I knew it was God's favorite specialty because he put Adam to sleep as his first medical act. So I knew that.
Jokes
And
are
also,
so
it's
bad.
almost like being in the ministry, like you.
Yeah,
And so
that's
then,
cool.
here in Grimsby, we only did surgery in the morning. So in the afternoon, the anesthetists became GPs. And so I had to be a GP, and then I had to actually listen to people for more than 10 seconds. And I was just overwhelmed by the number of people, particularly Christians, who came to see me with mental and emotional problems, and they had nowhere, they didn't know where to turn, they didn't know who to trust, and they didn't really find much help in the church because everyone there was walking in victory. And so it completely changed the course of my practice. So many people came to see me and I started to help them. They started to get better and it took over my life. I quit anesthesia. I quit general practice. So for 25 years, I had a mental health clinic. And now my wife and I, we teach mental, emotional, and spiritual health online and all over the world when we can travel.
Grant, it's an amazing story. I don't get tired hearing it. I do get tired of your lame jokes. I just have to a little pushback there. But I don't think we're going to put anyone to sleep right now, because at the heartbeat of what you're talking about is you want to give people hope. Life is so fragmented, falling apart, and COVID has just compounded it. Talk to me about the subject of hope. How do we find
Yeah.
hope today?
Well, the pandemic has raised the incidence of mental health problems just astronomically because the stress of it has just tipped people over. But the basis of our hope is our relationship with Jesus. I mean, the whole point, the whole reason Jesus came to the planet was to give us hope when we were in a hopeless condition. But the Bible example of the person who I think just epitomizes the man who lived and taught hope was the Apostle Paul. I mean, he had this global mandate and he was a creative, busy guy. And he spent so much of his time in prison. And imagine how hopeless and discouraging that must have been. And so he writes from prison in Philippians that he says that what happened to me was for the furtherance of the gospel. I mean, there he's stuck in jail. So how could he have that level of hope? Well, it's because he saw himself differently. He didn't see himself seated in prison. He saw himself seated with Christ. In Ephesians, he says, I'm seated with Christ. So that gave him hope. And then he said in Corinthians that we have the mind of Christ. So in his, what the natural realm would say was hopeless, he saw himself seated with Christ, with the mind of Christ, and that all things work together for good. I mean, the guy was relentlessly hopeless in a situation that I think would be awful.
You know, Grant,
And so
no,
Jesus came to give us hope.
I was just going to jump in that so often what you've often referred to is where our mind is at. That becomes so critical. Recently, I've had a person speak into my life. He's a pastor with ALS, and he speaks so much encouragement and perspective because he keeps his mind focused on Christ as opposed to the situation. Give me some practical steps for coping with COVID right now, and how I have to keep my mind sharp. What would you say to people?
Well, I would use exactly the same advice that Paul gave when he was in prison with Silas. He started to worship in a situation that was pretty grim. And so when he worshiped, he brought the presence of God in and the doors flew open. And you see, your spirit is free regardless of what's happening, around you. So you may be in lockdown, but your spirit is free. So to me, to bring the presence of God and change the way you think is worshiping. That's the first step. And to realize that this pandemic was no surprise to God, and he's holding our hand and he's walking us through it.
You know, people are often talking about the vaccine that is hopefully going to give hope. It's going to change things, bring things back to normal. Just talk to me about the vaccine. Should we get it? Should we not? And how do you expect it will change things?
Yeah, the vaccine is safe and effective, and I can't wait to get my shot. I just walk around with my sleeve rolled up, waiting for them to call me. And I'm not worried about any chip I'm not worried about anyone following me. As long as I carry a phone, I know they're following me. So the vaccine is definitely the way out of the pandemic. And so this is going to be the ticket so we can get back to normal finally. But the vaccine will give us the antibodies, and so that we can protect ourselves. Just the same way we don't get polio and measles anymore either.
So as we think about normal, what are your thoughts about what normal might look like in 6 months or a year? Do you think it'll be the way we once knew it? Are we going to be masking? Is there going to be large levels of paranoia? How do we prepare ourselves? Because I've been guilty of living in the future, of saying, oh, I just want to get away, little holiday. How do we live in the now?
Yeah, well, I have the same problem. I'm always thinking about the future, and I can't wait for holidays, and I can't wait to talk to people without a mask. But the way we live in the now, which is a struggle because of the restrictions, is you picture yourself walking with Jesus, and you talk to Jesus about your frustrations. And he always says, don't worry about it. I've got this. I knew it was coming. I have you looked after. You just hold my hand, sit on my lap, and work with me.
Grant, you've written a book called Emotionally Free. Tell us a little bit about it. We've got about a minute left in this conversation. Tell us about that and where people can access your resources.
Yeah, the whole point of our ministry is how to help people actually live out Romans 12:2 that says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the purpose of our ministry is to help show people how to do that. And so I wrote a book called Emotionally Free, which explains how to be transformed mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. And then we teach a course online called Free Your Mind. And so that walks people through the entire process of transforming the way they think. And we just divide it into mental health, spiritual health, and emotional health. And people can unload their baggage and have a new relationship with Jesus. So they can just go to my website, drgrantmullen.com, and find all our resources. They can subscribe to my weekly short videos on Wednesdays that are free, or to our membership or all our resources.